unanimous motion re inshore fishing sin tarishkint module hiskara chladi agus ictasnule a Dr. Michael Collins to move the motion.
I move the motion.
10 minutes, is it? 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Corla. Minister, first of all, I'd like to thank those in our office, Breen, O'Donnell and Mairead and McGrath for putting together this motion for us. I am delighted to be part of the Rural Independent Group putting forward this motion today on behalf of every inshore fisherman, both in West Cork and throughout the country. A motion, I may add, just for the inshore fishermen, which only for the Rural Independent Group would never get a mention here in the Dáil. The Irish inshore fleet comprises of approximately 91% of all our fishing vessels, Minister, and supports between 2,500 to 3,000 jobs in rural coastal communities. Similar to those in the bigger fleet, these inshore fishermen have their livelihoods go mainly unaided, and sadly, more and more inshore fishermen are leaving the sea, a place of their employment. Storm after storm strikes our shoreline year after year, but sadly, even that many fishermen could prove massive damage or losses. A refusal here in the Dáil meant they got no aid for the inshore men to replace his lost gear after my many calls. Many of the inshore fishermen I know of in West Cork fish for shrimp. These inshore fishermen's incomes have been severely affected with the collapse of the processed shrimp and velvet crab market, which impacts many inshore fishermen. And today, Minister, we back the call for a 12 million direct state financial package. Minister, you have met with the National Inshore Fishermen's Association before Christmas. They have laid the crisis bare, and aid is now required, and this motion calls on this to be agreed. If you and this government are only feeding fib stories to the inshore sector, be honest enough and vote against our motion. As I make it clear once more, 12 million compensation are many of these decent people will be going out of business. If this emergency fund is not announced today, let me tell every inshore fisherman or woman, you have been conned by this government. This will not be setting a precedence, Minister. You rightly aided the pig sector to the tune of millions last year to rescue their business, which was in a similar crisis. We also need to look at a fuel subsidy for inshore fishermen. They have to spend hugely on fuel for their inshore boats, especially as it's petrol they use, and large amounts. There was a fund through Europe, Minister, that other countries applied for their fishermen, but you refused to apply this to Ireland, which I presume the reason for same is you would not get permission from the Greens to help our fishermen. It is intolerable that funds allocated by the EU Commission have not been apportioned to our inshore fleet, while other EU countries draw from these funds in the form of fuel subsidies to their respective inshore fleets. I will be listening, Minister, with great interest to what you planned to aid these hard-working men and women. And while this 12 million won't be the greatest solution, it will help in some way for fishermen to adjust to prepare themselves going forward. It is completely unacceptable for the Minister for Marine and the Government to ignore the genuine astronomical pressures on the fishermen. In fact, the lack of any financial support for this unique sector could be called cruel, particularly as up to 3,000 jobs are now in jeopardy in rural coastal communities. Our motion today also instructs the Government to urgently grant the inshore fishery fleet a greater quota allocation with diversification to the other species, and this quota need not come from quotas to our Irish larger fleet. It can come from the quotas given all over the world to other countries of Irish fish out of Irish waters. It is very often that I blame the Greens for much of the difficulty rural Ireland finds itself in. But when it comes to fisheries, it is Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have destroyed the fishing industry in this country, as year after year, decade after decade, they shut a blind eye to every quota we could obtain and sadly handed away the quotas that we had on our own waters. It is wrong that in this Dáil I hear deputies either favour the inshore sector, the smaller man, or the larger fishing fleet, the so-called bigger guy. We should unite and fight as one, as it suits the Irish government to have them fight apart like the old British way, divide and conquer. In negotiations with Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar for the formation of government in 2020, I had two red liners if I was to support this government. One, no downgrading of Bantry Hospital, and we all see why I did not get that granted. And the other was a dedicated Minister for Fisheries, which was denied to me, or our country. Not even would a super junior or junior be offered. Even the Taoiseach at the time, Micheál Martin, asked me, where do you think, Deputy, will we find the ministries? Which one will we drop if you're to get your request? But hey presto, when it's suited to keep the nod and wink politics going, he parachutes 2 super juniors to keep the boys or girls happy. But of course, none of them are fisheries. Minister McConalogue must think I'm here having a go at him personally, but I'm not. I didn't ask who was to be the Minister for Fisheries, just a standalone Minister for Fisheries, solely responsible for the inshore fishing and larger fleet. This request was point-blankly refused, and we now see the consequences of the actions of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who have proven to be totally against the fishing sector down through the years. We have a massive, rich resource surrounding our country, and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, bit by bit, have handed it away to the foreign fleets. You have funded improvements to Piers, Minister, which must be welcomed. But do you realise what the fishermen have said to me recently about the funding in Piers? They said it's no longer for fishermen, because we're finished. These improvements are going to be for everybody else but us. And while I mention funds, what about the funds required for Union Hall Pier? This is vital. And both you, Minister, and the Din Taoiseach Micheál Martin raised all the locals' hopes in Union Hall and Glendore when you were on a damage limitation visit to West Cork after the shocking Brexit deal. But you forgot to bring the chequebook, leaving locals angered and dismayed that much-needed works at Union Hall Pier stay undone. For those fishermen in West Cork who are fighting on, we do need the Baltimore Breakwater Works in Baltimore to come in. I was talking to Independent Councillor Karen Coakley yesterday, who told me that this can be done and that the SAC can be moved for such cases, which she is fighting through the Cork County Council to have done. I urge you to sit up, Minister, and take note of this, as this works is urgently required for the fishermen of Baltimore. I want also to congratulate the people of Cork-McSherry and beyond who are kindly donated the top-of-the-range lifeboat, which I had the pleasure to be with all the locals at the pier on Sunday, welcoming this state-of-the-art boat, which will help save lives at sea in the years to come. A huge thank you to all concerned and to the volunteers who put their lives at risk to help others on the lifeboat. And this is what happens, Minister, when every inshore fisherman or woman goes to sea. They put their lives at risk to bring food to our table, to feed their families, having to go out in all weathers, and then this work stops. These inshore men have trained all their lives to be masters of the sea, but genuinely did not train for any other profession. In the rural places I represent, the Crookhavens, the Goleens, the Skull, Bella, the Hob, Bantry, Glengarriff, Adrigole, Castletownbere, Union Hall, and Baltimore, and further east, out all the way to Kinsale. I could go on and on. The livelihoods of these people is at risk. They will need time to adjust, and you, Minister, I hope, will recognise this today and give the 12 million aid that's been called for. I was brought up to respect fishermen by my mother, who gave us a serious warning always, for some reason, even though she had no fishing background, to respect the fishermen. This is why I always call for their very survival. And I will now call on rank and file mind change in your department, Minister, towards fishermen. A rank and file change within the SFPA towards fishermen, Irish fishermen. If this won't change, you will wipe out both sectors. Prior to Christmas, Minister, I was contacted by a fishing vessel off at Castletownbere, who has been continuously surrounded by a foreign vessel. This has happened where there was a near ramming incident last year, and in previous years where a person's life was lost because of the carry-on that's being carried out there. Now, I brought this before the Ag Marine Committee to, I think, for us to sit up and see who is responsible. The SFPA don't seem to want to respond. The department don't want to respond. The Taoiseach doesn't want to respond. It's an astonishing situation to think that Irish fishing vessels, who can prove by video they're being circled, surrounded by foreign vessels off our waters, and they have no protection whatsoever. No, if there's an infringement by an Irish vessel, there'll be no problem. They'll be surrounded and brought in ashore to Irish waters to face prosecution. But when it comes to saving their lives, there's nobody out there to help them. And Minister, this will have to be clarified as to who has rights and how can Irish fishermen be protected in waters when they go to fish, which is their true entitlement. Minister, as I said earlier on, I sincerely hope you'll back this motion, but back this motion on one basis, that there's €12 million going to be allocated to the inshore sector, and that there's going to be a fuel subsidy given to the inshore sector immediately. If you get up here today and support this motion and don't give either, of those requests that these inshore fishermen have asked, you're only codding them. And you won't fool us, and you certainly won't fool the public out there. I will be, as I said, listening with great intent to your speech in the next to see what have you in store for inshore fishermen in this country. Thank you.
I hope that this motion will generate cross-party support from across this House. We know that the sector needs protection, and it certainly needs its unanswered calls answered, however late in the day it may be. And I want to commend my colleague Deputy Michael Collins for all his work and indeed the passion and leadership he has shown in terms of having fishermen and fisherwomen's issues addressed in this House. But it is high time that you took notice of it, and I would hope certainly that we can get support across the House. As my colleague has noted, the Irish inshore fleet comprises of approximately 91% of our fishing vessels and supports between 2,500 and 3,000 full-time jobs in rural and coastal communities. Indeed, you have to wonder really why it is that organisations such as the National Inshore Fishermen's Association have to repeatedly and loudly make their argument to government, and why it is that there are such delays in responding from the government side. Is government of the belief and of the view that inshore fishermen can simply be discarded, ignored, or perhaps even spoken down to in a way which they would not dream of doing for example, to representatives of the tech industry? What really infuriates me about debates of this kind is that there seems to be an acceptance that all of our natural resources are simply up for grabs, or that they can be left to wither on the vine. The only natural resource government appears to give a damn about seems to be wind, and we all know why that is. The big subsidies and the big boys in the corporations, that's all you care about. If it's not wind, then government doesn't want to know. Look at our sugar beet sector. Look at the sellout there. A once thriving sector, once thriving and now forgotten. Look at our natural oil and our gas fields, with bans placed on their exploration. Look at our peat sector. In my reply to a parliamentary question, it was reported to me that 19,000 tonnes of peat and peat-related products are being exported out of this country and have been exported to Japan in the last decade. And yet, here you are punishing Irish people and banning them from using their own resources. There is a pattern here. All of the things that we have on our doorstep, all of the resources that we have in our own seas are being divvied up and sold off with no regard and no respect about how it will impact on vulnerable coastal communities or indeed on rural communities. Today we are talking about inshore fisheries, but tomorrow it will be some other area of rural life being attacked and some other indigenous sector of value that will be undermined or sold out. And I find it incredible. Your predecessors in Fianna Fáil really must be turning in their graves. We've seen the sellout of fisheries, now the sellout of forestry. By the way, that's shameful. You've sold out and chipped away at our sovereignty. That's what you've done. You've absolutely betrayed the Irish people, and you're nothing other than a shower of traitors. And I'll make no apologies for that. Where is the advantage to the Irish people and fishing communities in allowing such vital resources and activities to deteriorate to the point of collapse, or the sellout of precious resources? It's so disheartening to look back and survey the wreckage that has been delivered upon rural Ireland and coastal communities by the financial policies of a tiny and insignificant, ideological, bizarre party who are controlling you right, left and centre, and clearly they are the tail wagging the dog. Today it is the turn of the fishermen and fisherwomen to suffer. Tomorrow, as I say, it'll be somebody else. But make no mistake about it, it won't be the Googles or the Intel of this world that will suffer. They get the red carpet treatment. It will be the ordinary men and women of rural Ireland, the backbone of the rural economy. They're the ones who'll take the brunt for your policy and your lack of leadership and your shameful lack of betrayal. And your betrayal, not lack of, unfortunately, but your absolute betrayal. They'll bear that brunt. But the time is coming when the people of rural Ireland and coastal communities will say we've enough. and I believe that time is now. We are sick and tired of the policies of ruin and destruction. And there are simply no good reasons for government not to support this motion, nor indeed is there any good reason for any other party or group in this House not to support this motion. We must send a signal to the fishermen and fisherwomen of Ireland that we stand with them in solidarity, that we support them and that we will help them. And if it weren't for great leaders like Father John Joe Duffy in Donegal, we'd be in bigger trouble. At least those people have that man. Gurv Magat.
Perhaps you might just withdraw that comment.
I won't withdraw that comment. It's my view and my perception that they're traitors.
I'd ask you to reflect on that.
And all we have to do is look at our forestry.
I'm not going into a discussion on it. Honestly, we're over time, and in fairness to your colleague, we've held the clock. Deputy Richard O'Donnell.
Thank you, Laskin Colin. Minister, as you're a farmer, can you imagine a day sitting watching all your neighbours out working your land and getting paid by a subsidy given to them by the government? Can you imagine it, sitting at home looking out the windows and you're seeing people farm your land and getting subsidies for it by the government? This is exactly what is happening to the smaller boat owners sitting in the harbour on Irish waters and looking at France and Spain fishing their waters while benefiting from a subsidy, which your government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, sold out. Now, Minister, I have so many people that are absolutely astonished and dismayed from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that come to me on a weekly basis and want to know what are their parties doing that they followed all their lives. And they see something like this and they go, oh my God, are they really representing the parties that they're here supposed to be representing? Because they're not representing us. The market for shrimp and inshore fisheries has collapsed. There are about 1,700 of these fishermen and women currently in financial trouble. They are not able to claim VAT back on the petrol that they are using, even though it is available to the bigger trawlers. Today I am asking for the 12 million from the fund of the 285.4 million that is in Europe fund available for Ireland to deal with the cost of living increases due to the war in Ukraine, and give this to the shore shrimp and velvet crab fishermen and women. This group is represented by the Velvet Crab organisation. This can only be so easily done by the BIM portal. As the BIM have all their details, these fishermen and women need to have the industry themselves to survive. In 2020, their fuel cost was 42 cents a litre, which our government took 50% in tax. In 2022, they were paying 90 cents a litre, which the government then took 50% in tax. And the government took an additional 45.5 cents in tax, more than double of what they were paying in the previous year. You need to give back to these people for what you have taken off them in tax alone. This is the smaller side of the fishing industry, which accounts for approximately 1,700 small vessels who are dealing with a loss of fish quota, which your government gave away. You gave away our fishing rights, and you're responsible for this. Unfair competition from larger foreign commercial vessels, which we heard from my colleague here, Deputy Michael Collins, who has been fighting for the fisheries every day since he came in here. And the rural independents have been fighting for it. The cost of living, particularly in fuel costs, which the government takes 50% in tax. The war in Ukraine and the weather conditions, which have been particularly bad this year. Now, I'm from farming background. I'm not from fishing background, but it's the same sequence of events. Last night we stood here in forestry. Same situation again. So now we have forestry sold out, farming sold out, and now the fishery sold out by a Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael-led government with the Greens. The people of Ireland from Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who put their trust in you to protect them in rural Ireland, are dismayed to know why our representatives from our own counties, like me in Limerick, are not opening their voices to protect the next generation of families coming through. And all that is happening from your department and your government is you're taxing them out of existence, you're giving away funding to larger groups and forgetting about the real people of Ireland, that's the squeezed middle working class. You're going for the big conglomerates. Why can't you protect the people that put you here? And I'm calling on my Limerick TDs, city and county, to stand up and represent the parties that put you up here, represent rural Ireland who put you up here, and give us our voice back at a cabinet where all these decisions are being made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alaska Corda, and listen, thanks very much to the Rural Independent Group as well for putting this motion down today on inshore fisheries. It's a sector that doesn't get the attention it deserves in this Dáil. It's a sector that's very close to my heart and that I've worked and fight tooth and nail for as Minister to do all I can to support them. They're very much central to everything I do as Minister for the Marine. But it's good to see actually that it actually is getting some floor time here in the Dáil, and it's good to see that for the first time since I've been appointed as Minister for the Marine that actually some grouping, any grouping, has put down a motion on the inshore fisheries in the Dáil floor here. It's great, and thank you. And please do it a bit more, because the opposition in general don't give this issue enough attention. But it's good to see it actually getting some attention there in the Dáil. And also to allow myself the opportunity to update you as well in relation to things I've been doing to work with the inshore sector, to develop it, to promote them, and to try and ensure that their income is protected. So listen, as I say, it's close to my heart. With inshore fishing sector is part of my local community at home. Orris Pier, Mallinhead Pier, Glengad Pier, Bonnegee Pier, Greencastle Pier, all of those dependent on the inshore fishing sector. All of those people from those parishes I went to school with, to secondary school with, sat in the classroom with, have grown up in their communities with. All of those piers that I just mentioned, all of them I've invested money in as Minister for the Marine. Across all of them actually, probably €20 million on average over the last couple of years gone into those piers and harbours on balance just alone. And that's a reflection of how I value the inshore sector. And that's just talking about Inshore and North Inshore, where I'm from. Likewise, I have that commitment across the country to an inshore sector where we have by far the largest number of boats in the country, all small, but by far the largest number of boats and families dependent on the inshore sector. Deputy Collins, in your contribution, you mentioned, and again, thanks for putting this motion down, but you mentioned Union Hall Pier. Pier I know very well. I remember walking on 2 summers where I spent our holidays renting an apartment in Glandore, walking from Glandore over to Union Hall to the fish shop, buying the fish, and taking it back and cooking it for our evening dinner. So I know Union Hall very well. We have invested in Glandore Pier. As Minister, I've invested in Glandore Pier. Haven't invested in Union Hall Pier, other than for some fencing, which was applied for and which I granted. But I didn't receive any other application for funding from Union Hall. It's a local authority pier. I've spent €50-something million as Minister in small piers and harbours, local authority piers and harbours across the country. 50 million in the last 18 months. Normally in any one year, there's about 3 million spent. I've spent about 50 million, okay? Unfortunately, I haven't received any application for Union Hall, which is a Cork local authority pier. If I'd received it, I can assure you that I'd done all I could to try and put money into it, Deputy Collins. But listen, somebody's been, seems to be yourself, has been asleep at the wheel here. Because, you know, you can stand up here and give out to me for not giving funding for something you don't even know I never got an application for. And I think, you know, your own colleague, your own co-option, who's been chair of Cork County Council, your own brother, the authority that was supposed to be actually making any applications. So listen, get those ducks in a row before you stand up here and give out to me for not actually granting funding, for not actually granting funding. So listen, to move on and deal with the issues here. The government deputies has been very committed to supporting the inshore fisheries sector in specific ways, including ensuring that inshore waters continue to be protected for smaller fishing vessels and recreational fishers, and that pair trawling as well will be prohibited inside the 6-mile limit. And I'm very fully supportive of this objective. I met specifically with the Inshore Fisheries Forum in December last year to hear their concerns and goals for the inshore fishing sector. The NIF and its supporting network of 6 regional inshore fisheries forums are consultative bodies established to foster industry-led development of proposals for the management of fish stocks within 6 nautical miles of the Irish shore. The NIF is currently in the process of implementing the first industry-led strategy for the Irish inshore fisheries sector, whose vision is that the inshore fisheries sector will have a prosperous and sustainable future, delivered through a united industry with a strong influential voice. My department's Food Vision 2030 strategy also sets out further aims in enhancing the development of sustainable inshore fisheries and balancing this with safeguarding fishing-related livelihoods and protecting the marine environment. The priorities identified in the strategy include the development of a profile for the inshore sector, building the sector's capacity to engage with policy development, and enhancing the industry's understanding of management and planning for inshore sectors. I particularly welcome, Deputies, the input by the forums in the recently updated bivalve protocol, and I'm satisfied that it plays a vital role in defining the procedures for opening a new fishery for wild bivalve molluscs, or extending the scope of an existing fishery. And I also look forward to their input in addressing concerns about a recent decline in brown crab stocks along our coast. Following engagement with the National Inshore Fisheries Forum, I've requested a review of the management of the Irish brown crab fishery to identify measures that could be introduced to support the sustainability of brown crab stocks, and that will be undertaken by a multidisciplinary working group. Really importantly, I was very glad this week to be able to announce the recognition of the National Inshore Fisheries Association as a producer organisation. Really important step forward for inshore sector. And this is the second EU producer organisation, along with the Irish Islands Marine Resource Organisation, to achieve that recognition, to be awarded that recognition during my term as Minister. The sector has very strong representation. There's a significant number of producer organisations, spokesperson organisations for the fishing sector. But like as I pointed out here, has been the case in this Dáil since I've been here for the last 2.5 years with inshore fisheries, never getting a private member's motion before. Likewise, its representation in the representation area within the producer organisations has been very light for the last number of years too. They didn't have a producer organisation. There's 7 or 8 producer organisations across the whole sector. Mostly, though, all representing the whitefish sector, which are much larger than the inshore boats, the whitefish sector, are in the pelagic sector, the large boats that go off way out to sea, and the processing sector. So very significant voices, professional voices there representing the processors, representing pelagics and representing whitefish, but no paid professional voice to represent the inshore sector. And the inshore fishermen are all too busy at sea making a living, but not getting their voice heard enough at national level. I've worked with them to change that. They now have 2 producer organisations that will have staffed offices and paid professional people working on a day-to-day basis all year round to represent them and make sure that their voice is heard at national level, and that they get fair play within the sector, as well as from government. A few other issues in the short bit of time I have. The mackerel hook and line fishery. It's an important, very important for the inshore sector, and I note the position outlined by the deputies in respect of it in their motion. I've asked Board East Giwara to engage and look at how we can further add value to the hook and line sector, so that actually is a premium product. And also we're monitoring on an ongoing basis as well how we can manage the hook and line fishery in a way that the best works for inshore fishers as well. Really important step forward. And as you know, I visited piers and harbours right across the country and engaged directly with fishermen on the pier, inshore fishermen too. The thing that came up on all piers from Oireachtas to Kilmore Quay and everywhere in between when I took up my role as Minister was the need to get the spur dog fishery open, to work at that and try and get that open. And I'm glad to say that that's something I secured at the EU Fisheries December Council meeting there in December. We now, for the first time in over 10 years, have a spur dog fishery. A really important step forward. Also, the reopening in the December Fisheries Council of the Northwest Herring. Really important step forward too. Massively important fishery. We've got that opened again. That's really important to the inshore sector. Fishermen themselves and fisherwomen know the value of that, and that's something we will try and build on too. And as you know, I've launched a new consultation just there in the last number of days as to how we manage that. A consultation that's going to be really important for inshore fishermen in particular to engage in, so that can be an important fishery for them. Then in relation to financial supports, last year I delivered out of the Brexit Fisheries Model Adjustment Scheme, put a scheme together coming out of the task force. Even though the inshore sector normally don't fish quota species by and large, it's normally non-quota species. So therefore, Brexit in terms of quotas didn't impact as much in the inshore sector. But we put together a Brexit package for them, which delivered €2,700 for smaller boats, for the very small inshore boats, and €4,000 direct cash aid to other inshore boats last year. Very significant as well. So listen, I will be continuing this work in every way I can to back the inshore sector. And listen, please do a bit more across the board in relation to making sure that the value of the inshore sector is recognised here across the floor of Dáil.
Nothing this year. 12 million reviews.
Excuse me, Deputy. Next we have the Sinn Féin slot, starting with Deputy Pádraig McGlough. Sorry. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Pádraig, I'm wrong. Excuse me.
I was thinking that,
it's
yeah.
a rural independent, Danny Healy. Excuse me. Yeah. I'll wear the glasses. Excuse me.
I'll Healy Raisel always respect it and get a place for me.
Try and get it.
All right. Well, Minister, thanks for recognising that we are the only group that brought a motion forward to represent the inshore fishermen, because they have been left behind in many ways, Minister, and you have been talking for 10 minutes, but you didn't mention that you were going to accede to our request for 12 million, just 12 million for the inshore fishermen from all around our countries, all around our coastal communities, who are on their knees at the present time. And you see, it has been spelt out for you there already. Just take the shrimp. Most of the inshore fishermen, they fish for shrimp, and the season is from September to March. And since September, the things started to go down very bad, in that there was no market in Spain and Portugal and the other tourist attractions, and the price was very bad, and the market wasn't there at all in the finish. And since mid-October, storms and after storm and wind after wind, many fishermen haven't been able to fish since then, or very poorly. Their window of opportunity was very short up until, and they have ceased since the 1st of December because of no market. And we're asking you now for the 12 million to tide these people over and to try to keep them going. Every other sector, including sectors from other countries, are being well seen after and have been well seen after by the government. But these people who are left behind, they're an integral part of the coastal community. If the fishermen are making a few bob, the shops, the local pub, the local restaurant, all those are left behind. And we have to accept that our inshore fishermen are also affected by the massive increase in the cost of fuel, and they can't get any of that back. And I suppose he'll blame the war anyway for the cost in the fuel, and I suppose he'll blame the war as well for the loss of the market. But we're calling on the state now for financial assistance of 12 million to mitigate the socio-economic impact of the crisis. Smaller piers are neglected, Minister, and I can think of all the ones that are very local to myself and start in the Khmer side and go back along Timpleno, Blackwater, Tahana, Rosdohan, the Oyster Bed, Sneem, Glishk, and back so forth. And I really, and then you go the other side, Coolnigillock, Keelmacalog, and all back along to Lorach and until you reach Castleton Bay. There's so many small fishermen there that try to devise, try to improvise and try to stay going. They're getting no social welfare. They're working, doing small bits of farming and maybe small bits of building, trying to improvise and keep going. And this fishing was an integral part of their income, and they have it lost completely now, Minister. And I'm appealing to you. You say you're from much the same scenario that we're representing. These people have boats of less than 12 metres, 16 and 18 feet long. And I think of people like Frank Riney and Michael Camper and those kind of fellas, and George Jim in Blackwater and the Shays of Rostohan. There's 2 sets of Shays there. Mike Shays and Donald Shay, and then the Bryans and Schneem and back along to Dleesh. These people try so hard, and it's so dangerous. And I often ask when I see them out, because I used to work along the roads along the bay, why are they out the bad day? And when the wind is blowing and there's rain, and I was told that that's the best days for fishing. They get more fish. And then I say to you, the big trawlers, they come up the bay in Kenmare, and he say that he's involved in the protection of smaller vessels. But what are they doing when 2 big trawlers come up on either side of the bay with nets across it that clean everything out? I raised that in the Oireachtas committee a few months ago, Minister. What are they doing about that, or what are they going to do about it? And stop it. It's completely unfair, because these trawlers come up and take the everything, and which means that we've had no mackerel. I've been so many people have been told that there's no mackerel at all this year, and I remember fishermen from Macroom and in Shannon and different places, they was called to the bar. They had buckets of mackerel, and they throw out a few there, and they were grand. And there's no sign of them with the last couple of years, Minister, because there is no mackerel. The bay has been totally cleaned out, and we hear about the big factory ships that land into Dingle Harbour. And they're so big that 12 forklifts can work at one time on top of them. We're told they're from different nationalities, there's no account, they can't be taxed. We're told even that to the Chinese, and we know what harm they have done already, besides factory ships. And all along Carsiveen and all those piers and those fishermen, they're all impacted now, Minister, and I'm calling you to please, you're seeing after every other section of the community, and like I said, even people of different nationalities, and you're seeing after them well, and we're letting these people behind. We have to see after them, Minister. They're part of the coastal communities, and like I said, an integral part. And they're so important to the likes of the Lake House, the Blackwater Tavern, Keel McAlogue, that's run so well by Helen and her staff. Those people depend so much. The local shops depend on these people surviving. And I'm appealing to you, your government, Minister, respectfully, to come now when you're asked, and you say you're from a coastal community yourself, and I believe you are. You must see after them. See after our own people now, whatever the Greens are saying or whatever any other one is saying. This is your time. You're the minister that's in charge of these small fishermen at this time. And I'm respectfully appealing to you to see after them. This is so important. And yes, we are the only group that brought forward the motion like this. I have to highlight as well at this stage the state of our two roads on either side of the Kenmare Peninsula. of the Kenmare Bay. The road to Lorach and trees crisscrossing and fish lorries hitting off of it, them. And then west of Blackwater Bridge on the other road, the state of that, where if you go around it with an attic, a car will be inside under you. And then we see back a few miles back the road where there was 2 kilometres of a footpath and a cycleway put where there's no cycleway leading to this new cycle path or out of it. And it makes no sense in the world, and people's lives and crashes there every day. And it's so important that we have a safe road for these vessels, because I'm glad when I see these big lorries go up the village with fish. It's because we're producing something. I also, for the few seconds I have left, want to thank Star Seafoods in Tussish for the employment they have given back over the years, the McCarthy's, and there's a young generation there now, and the way that company is seeing after the local people and trying to employ people. But the cost of fish at the present time and the scarcity of it is impacting on those, and we must ensure that places like that are kept going, because we've been hit bad enough as it is. But if we lose the people that are involved and working in this in the inshore fishing, our communities are doomed completely.
Thank you, Deputy. We move on. Next is the Sinn Féin slot shared with a number of deputies. 20-minute slot, starting with Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin. 8 minutes.
The first thing I want to do is to thank the Rural Independents for bringing forward this motion, and it's been my honour and privilege to work alongside Deputy Michael Collins, and particularly over the last 3 years, and we have relentlessly raised the plight of our fishing communities, both in this chamber and in the committees and out there in the wider community. And I look forward to working with Deputy Collins in particular over the time ahead. Very passionate about our fishing communities. Minister, this is the document that we produced a number of years ago, and at the time I would have toured pretty much all the piers and harbours around the coast, and I continue to talk as the Sinn Féin spokesperson to fishermen every day of my life. And I've appealed to you again and again to listen to our fishing communities, Minister. You are, like myself, from the Inshore Peninsula. You are surrounded by piers and harbours. You're in a perfect position to be briefed and advised by them. So from the Inshore Peninsula, round the west of Donegal, down to Killybegs, and right round our coast, it's your responsibility to act on what they are telling us. And what they are telling us is that they are staring out at this huge resource, which is 200 miles in front of them of the Irish Exclusive Economic Zone. This is a huge resource, a potential creator of wealth and jobs for those fishing coastal communities. But due to the failures of our government over the years in the Common Fisheries Policy, we have not seen the proper return of our own natural resource right in front of us. And you know that. You know that from the community you're from in the Inshore Peninsula. And that has been a profound failure. Now, I want to lean on very important comments that Deputy Collins used. None of us are buying into divide and conquer. I was given really good advice when I started off as a Sinn Féin spokesperson on fisheries and the marine from a fisherman in the west of Ireland, and he advised me, be very careful not to buy into the big versus small fishermen and divide and conquer. Fight for all of them, do what's right and be fair by all of them. So I do support the exclusion of larger boats from the 6-mile limit. I do support a fair share of mackerel, of herring, of spurdog, and indeed arguably exclusively giving bluefin tuna if we can ever get one bloody fish to take back rather than having to release it again. Just think about this. Bluefin tuna is the most lucrative fish, and one of the most lucrative, if not the most lucrative fish in the world today. It's in abundance now. It's now accepted by the Marine Institute, by the department. It's in abundance in our waters. Yet Irish fishermen have to do a catch and release. So you take tourists out, you catch this fish, which is, by the way, feeding on our own fish. It's a predatory fish. It gets fattened up and you have all the countries of Europe and the world catching them within our exclusive economic zone and outside in the international waters after being fattened here. I mean, and we haven't even got one fish. The allocation to the European Union of bluefin tuna increased by something like 75% in recent years because that species is doing well again, but we can only have catch and release. Catch them on a rod, release them. Imagine the extra wealth that could bring to inshore fishermen. So the other issue is in terms of crab and lobster and other shellfish. Having to rely on them is not going to be a future for our inshore fishermen. You know that. You've been told that. I want to welcome some good news. I want to be fair about these points. The spur dog allocation was a crucial issue. Everywhere I went, particularly for the inshore fleet on the smaller piers, everywhere I went, they mentioned getting access right down the west of Ireland and round into the southeast. They mentioned access to spur dog. So that is good news. That is welcome news. That quota has been secured. More of that. I want to welcome the fact that the NIF is now a producer organisation. And it is really, really important. And this is where I say this is very, very welcome, but I'm going to throw a challenge back to you, Minister. The islands, I think we also need to include in this motion, standing up for the islands fishermen, for the inshore fishermen. We take them all together. They now have a producer organisation, as you know, the islands fishermen and now the inshore fishermen. Now that they both have producer organisations, it's critical that they have a place at the table because mackerel quota, herring quota are public quota and they need to have a fair share, right? But we also need to fight when we talk about particularly the likes of Killybegs that's built up a pelagic industry through hard work over many years. We have to fight for the fair share of pelagic fish. And you know the issue of blue whiting, and I do believe that you have been working with the industry on that. So, Minister, I'm very critical of the failure of the Irish government over decades now. It is, and the words used by Deputy Nolan are very strong words, but I tell you, if you speak to fishermen, that's how they feel. That's the words they use. I'm sorry to say it. That is the words they use about their own department particularly, and they feel really angry. They call it the Department Against the Marine. So you're from fishing communities in Inshore. I believe that some of the things you've done recently are very welcome, but we have to do more, Minister, right? And the first thing I'm going to say to you, right, is you have people in your party and from your party in the recent past in Donegal who are passionate about the fishing industry, who could be brilliant people to advise you. Please listen to them. Please listen to them. Maybe you are starting to listen to them because there's some positive stuff happening here. As long as you do positive stuff and you fight for fishermen, you'll have my support, you'll have support of the deputies here. But if we continue to see a department that is against the marine, that fails people in the way that it has, then we will stand up here and we will challenge them and we will repeat the language we hear in our communities. That's our job. Our job is to listen to what's happening out there and to hold government to account and ask you to do what is right. So the final issue I want to touch on, I think I have about another minute and a half, am I right in saying? The final issue I want to touch on is the whole issue of fuel. You had failed, Minister, to provide financial support to the fishing industry who had been so severely impacted by the fuel crisis. You said that they had the tie-up scheme. Now, I think that was totally wrong because the tie-up scheme was about the loss of quota from Brexit, totally separate issue, and they were getting supports for the loss of quota. But the inshore fleet had no tie-up scheme. There was no tie-up scheme for the inshore fleet. So the inshore fleet got no financial supports whatsoever throughout this period of huge challenge. So I very much support, and we put it in our alternative budget, that there would be a financial allocation, particularly from the EMFAF. That's European money that's there. I understand there's 5 million right now as we speak that's sitting there to be allocated. So I appeal to you again to support the proposition. It's 12 million that's outlined here from a range of different sources, including European funding, to get that directly to the industry. The inshore industry in particular got no supports, but the overall industry needs supports too. So, Minister, you started off your speech and talking about what surrounds you and the peers and how they've influenced you. I'm asking you in your final period now in government to continue with some of the welcome measures of recent days, to stand up for inshore fishermen, to stand up for all fishermen, and to get what's fair for our country in European
you, Deputy. And next we have Deputy Rose Conway-Walsh.
Garmagad, I want to thank the Independent Rural Group for bringing forward this really important motion, and that's not surprising, seeing that I come from County Mayo, where we have a huge lot of coastal communities, and communities like Erris and Achill and Clare Island and Ballycastle, Port Hurlin, and right along the coast of this. One of the biggest things that gets to them, or one of the major concerns they have, and have had for years, is if they have to stand and watch as massive trawlers raid their fish and show complete disregard for their own workers. We've just come from a presentation in the AV room where the workers on these boats are describing the slave-like conditions that they have to work to, but absolute disregard for the marine ecosystems as well. And they're the same ecosystems that the fishermen who are watching out and looking at this, and their forefathers and for generations, they have protected those ecosystems, and their hands are tied while they watch their fish being given away. And yet you have these communities where you have fishing communities where you have high unemployment and experiencing real difficulties, and they're watching their natural resources being given away like that. So it is no wonder that these communities feel that they have absolutely been neglected by consecutive governments. The EU and the UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement that came out of Brexit merely served as the most recent example of the government selling out on the Irish fishing communities. The Irish government failed to put up any real fight to secure a fair burden share with other EU member states as part of that agreement. We need to see increased access to fish in our waters to enable us to sustain and to grow the rural coastal communities. Inshore fishing is the fishing that happens obviously within the 6 nautical miles of the coast, and yet it makes up over 90% of the entire fishing fleet of registered Irish vessels. And makes up the large majority of those directly employed in the sector. The importance of inshore fisheries in sustaining coastal communities cannot be overstated, Minister. It's estimated that 2,500 to 3,000 jobs and livelihoods and families are supported within that sector. These are really important jobs in the communities that I come from. They can never hope to have the huge multinationals in there, but they really depend on the inshore fishing. But they have been hit by Brexit, by COVID, by the increased fuel costs, by reduced markets and ongoing unequal access to fishing opportunities. You cut me off when I need to cut off, right? Minister, you need to listen to the inshore fishing sector, and you need to put right what has been wrong for years.
Minister, the scene has been well and truly set out in relation to the Irish fishing sector here this morning by all of the previous speakers, and I do want to genuinely thank the Rural Independent Group for bringing this motion forward, and Dr. Collins and his colleagues for the work that they have done. I also want to commend my own colleague, Dr. Pádraig McLaughlin, our spokesperson in this area, for his efforts in engaging with the Irish fishing community over the last number of years. In fact, he visited Waterford last year, and we met with fishermen in Helvig, in Ardmore and in Dungarvan, and also in Dunmore East. And we listened very directly to what those fisher men and women had to say. So I want to hone in on a couple of issues in my own constituency of Waterford, Minister, and I've raised all of these issues with you before, but I have to say that they haven't been resolved. The first is landing rights for British and Northern registered vehicles into Dunmore were removed in December 2020 following the Brexit trade and cooperation deal. Now, I've raised this issue with you in the past. Dr. McLaughlin has raised this issue with you. Some of my constituency colleagues have raised the issue, and still no progress. And the question should be asked, why is there no progress? The most recent PQ response I got back suggested that the SFPA are still examining the matter. In God's name, how long does it take to examine the matter when we're talking here about people's livelihoods and the opportunity to actually invest in a harbour and in a fishing coastal community? These landings provide a significant economic boost to the village of Dunmore, so I would ask you to relook at that again. I also raised with you in the past as well the issue of vacant apartment-owned buildings at Dunmore East. And I know there was tendering processes that went out for some of those buildings, still not being used. And the question has to be asked, Minister, as to what's been done about that. It makes no sense whatsoever. Any of the villages I go to, whether it's Dunmore, Passage East, Cheap Point, Dungarvan, Helvick, when I talk to fishermen, they say to me, why can we just not fish? And I'll finish on this point, Minister. We held a very successful public meeting in Waterford last year. And we had about 400 people at the meeting. And one of those people who attended is a well-known Dunmore fisherman, Jimmy Burns, who very passionately addressed the meeting and set out the importance of fishing, the pride that he and fishermen have in their community and that tradition. And he was standing up for his heritage and the heritage of so many others. I think if people in the department had half the passion that Jimmy has and so many more have, we'd have a much, much better fishing and coastal communities than we currently have.
3 minutes.
Minister, I want to support the motion that has been brought forward by Deputy Collins and his colleagues, and to commend the work that's going on there, and also by our spokesperson, Deputy McLaughlin. I think anyone, I don't think it requires an intimate knowledge of the fishing industry to understand the long injustice that has been foisted on the fishing communities right across the state, and the missed opportunities that exist, and particularly in the context of much greater popularity of seafood. And there's no doubt that that has to be addressed. There's an incredibly long tradition and history of it, and it's vitally important to these communities. Minister, the issue I want to address with you particularly is perhaps somewhat of a niche issue, but opportunities to address it are rare, and that relates to fishermen and fisherwomen in inland fisheries. I'm thinking particularly Cork Harbour. Now, this falls across a number of departments, and it's primarily the Department of Social Protection that is responsible for it, which is a bit of an anomaly. Unfortunately, within that department, that whole area of inland fishery is primarily seen in the context of tourism and angling and so on, which is valuable and brings value to local communities. But in small localities where there is a tradition of, in large harbours, such as in Cork Harbour, and I'm thinking of villages such as Passage West and families such as the Murphys and the Howards and Jack Howard, and people who are fishing for many generations, and Blackrock and the Collins and other families like that. These are communities in which fishing was once a very large industry, but because of the development of Cork Harbour and different things like that, that has diminished. Unfortunately, communities, and these are primarily draft net fishermen, they are very low as a priority. The say in which they have with the Inland Fisheries Board is very limited, because the focus is very much on that angling. So I would urge you to use whatever scope that you have within your department, because some of these fishing crews would go from the inland to the inshore, to raise this with your colleague, the Minister for Social Protection, and try and give a greater voice to these. Culturally and historically, they're far more similar to the inshore fishermen. They're trying to make something of a living out of it. It's very difficult because the quotas are so low, and because the issues that are there. They understand the science. They want to be part of the solution. They want to work with Inland Fisheries Ireland, but this is a tradition that has very, very long roots, and it would be a shame to see it eliminated entirely. And there's very, very few of these fishermen and women left. Cork Harbour is one place. There's another few places in some of the lakes and inshore up the coastline. I think it's important that these departments, both departments, work with these inland fishers and draft net fishermen to support their ongoing business.
Gormaigat Cahirlock, and I'd also like to thank Deputy Collins and the Rural Independents for bringing this absolutely vital motion forward, and it's absolutely necessary that we have these conversations. And here I have no doubt that an awful lot of us have had the same conversations I've had with fishers in relation to ensuring the sustainability of their industry. Look, Minister, I know you've had engagement also. You know the issues that are are out there. But I suppose the big thing is, no more than when we talk about farming and the family farm, it is about ensuring the sustainability of this industry, ensuring the sustainability of the wider community of these fishing communities, and that's whether I'm talking about in the likes of Clogherhead or Carlingford, and even those that are involved in fishing in around my own hometown of Dundalk. We've all seen in the public domain over the last period, you know, of what you could only call the anger that there is in relation to not only what has happened post-Brexit. We all know that there were many wrongs that were committed in relation to the common fisheries policy over many years in relation to the access that Irish fishermen didn't have to waters that were rightfully theirs, or to quotas that at least some of which were rightfully theirs. And this has obviously impacted long term on that particular industry. So we have heard many fishermen speak about the fact of the necessity of the vital supports to keep the industry going, rather than trying to decommission or to end it. So these are the things we need to do. Look, in fairness, the rural independents have put it fairly straight, in the sense that this is straightforward about putting €12 million, and we're talking about European support funds, we're talking about the EMFAF, and ensuring that it gets into the rightful hands of those that are involved in the industry. And look, we've all heard that there's huge qualms in relation to monies that are lost through administration. While accepting there's a need for administration, but I think we do need to look at this, and it is a point of the fact that there are major issues here. As I say, we all accept that the fishing industry in Ireland, and that those involved in the fishing industry have been given the short straw over many years, and we really need to rectify that. We need some sort of, I suppose, fairness, and again, we can't have that they take the entire slack. We know that even in the, as I say, the Brexit negotiations, that once again it was their back on which an awful lot of deals were done, and we really need to equalise the playing ground, Minister, and I think there's a requirement for you to do that.
Thank you, Deputy. Next is the Labour Party slot, Deputy Alan Kelly, 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the Rural Independents for this motion, which we will be supporting. I do come from a landlocked county, but having said that, it doesn't take much analysis to know that the fishermen in our country have been let down. Particularly, I've met people from West Cork and South Kerry, where I have a lot of connections, as many of you know, and indeed West Clare and further up the west coast. And really what we're seeing is a change, and very negative change, and you really would feel for them. So we will be supporting this motion, because the inshore fleet comprises around 91% of our fishing vessels, employing close on 3,000 people in very, very rural communities. And what really gets to me when I talk to many of these groups, as I have over the last number of years, going back as long as when I was an MEP, in fact, there are many intergenerational families involved. And what you see is, in fairness, and I accept your, I suppose, interest in this area, Minister, is you see it just dwindling all the time. And that is hugely unfortunate, because the Irish seafood sector has been under enormous pressure, not just with Brexit, but also, obviously, the additional strain from other issues, including what's going on with Ukraine. The EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement has also had a disproportionate impact on our seafood. Our fleet loses 15% of its annual quota. Exports of ingredients and supplies from the UK have become hugely disrupted. And the UK land bridge, which, as we all know, would be the fastest route to market for continental Europe, is less viable, to say the least. The impact can be seen in particular on the shrimp market, which has effectively collapsed, with one group of around 600 smaller inshore fishers losing an estimated €5 million in the build-up to Christmas last year alone. Packages valued at over €100 million have been provided to help the larger offshore sector dealing with the ongoing negative impacts of Brexit. But by comparison, Unfortunately, the inshore sector has received around 3.7 million, despite accounting for 91% of the fishing fleet. And as recommended by the Seafood Task Force set up by the Minister here, one-off payments to 2,700 for owners of vessels under 8 metres and 4,000 for owners of larger vessels were made, but it's not enough. The European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, EMFAF, implements the EU Common Fisheries Policy and aims to boost the resilience of the seafood sector, to accelerate its green transition and to support coastal communities. The total finance allocation is 258.4 million. One slight issue with the motion, I think you have a typo there. It's not 285, it's 258. Comprised, I think it's just a typo to be fair, comprised of an EU contribution of 142.4 million and a contribution of 116 million from the state. 50% of this funding allocation is to be dedicated to building resilience to current challenges in the fishery sector and improving sustainability, which obviously we all know is necessary. Despite a 114% increase in fuel prices between 2020 and mid-2022, the government has repeatedly refused to draw down on EU fuel aid. Data from BIM shows that Irish fisheries require between 20 to 25 million in fuel aid to effectively compete in Europe. Fleets from other countries whose governments have distributed existing fuel aid or are offering other fuel aid supports are being given a competitive advantage against the Irish fleet. The European Commission has allowed for a derogation in fuel subsidies, which has been capitalised on by France and Spain, for example, but the Minister has so far refused to grant such relief to our own fishermen. So in your reply, Minister, I would appreciate if you would deal with this matter. Another issue I'd like you to deal with in your reply was, which I very much was taken with earlier on, you said that 50 million was given out to a range of different areas across the country, which was a massive increase from years before, and I accept that. A number of locations didn't apply, as you quite rightly pointed out. Is that still open, or will it be reopened? Because obviously those that didn't apply, in many cases do need to apply, as you have stressed. So you might answer that in your reply as well. Ireland's fishing fleet has an excellent reputation, but the viability of the vast majority of that fleet is now in question. We've heard from numerous organisations, such as the Irish Fish Producers Organisation and the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, as well as individual fisheries, that whether or not this sector survives really does absolutely depend on direct and targeted support for the industry. I've no doubt that there are avenues nationally and particularly through EU that need more focus, Minister, and that's something we'll be concentrating on in the Labour Party. And it's important to keep in mind that this is the livelihoods of those working from very, very small inlets, piers and harbours all around our coast, and they are really facing a really difficult period if there isn't direct help given soon. The Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine has, I welcome, recently formally recognised the National Inshore Fishermen's Association, NIFA, as an EU producer organisation. This is a very welcome move. I think collectively we would all support that. But really it's tokenistic if there isn't greater supports given and we get to the heart of the issue, because our inshore fishing fleet need immediate targeted financial aid, both current and capital, and if there isn't a plan put in place very soon, Minister, for this group, which doesn't get as much attention inside in this chamber, I believe, as it should do, well then they're facing a very difficult future, so please act. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Next we have Deputy Holly Kearns, 8 minutes.
Thanks, Cahirlach. First of all, I just want to thank the Rural Independents and welcome this rare opportunity to talk about inshore fishing. Despite being the largest segment of our fishing sector and providing the most employment, it's too often overlooked. This is a timely discussion as the National Inshore Fishers Association has finally, thanks to their tireless efforts, achieved producer organisation status. I was delighted to be able to assist them in this process, and acknowledgement is due to the Minister for your support also. Genuinely, thank you. However, despite this good news, overall the inshore fishing has been neglected by this and previous governments. In terms of vessels, people employed, distribution and cultural heritage, it is the most significant part of the fishing industry. But despite this, government policy and crucially quota distribution vastly favours larger vessels and the bigger players. As I've continuously raised, this is a highly unequal system designed and enforced by the Minister and Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Last week we discussed the new Office of Food Regulation and the vulnerability of primary producers to exploitation. Unfortunately, in the case of inshore fishing, it's the government who are actually imposing unfair trading practices by limiting the capacity of this sector. The clearest example of this appalling disparity is the mackerel quota. Currently, only 2% of this quota is assigned to vessels under 15 metres, while 98% is given to a small number of larger boats. To be clear, over 2,000 boats get only 2%, while fewer than 100 larger boats get 98% of that share. In June 2021, this meagre quota was reached for that year, meaning fishers who were just getting by were not permitted to catch even a few dozen mackerel for sale at the likes of a farmer's market or to local restaurants. I raised this issue on behalf of the inshore fishers at the time. Almost 2 years later, nothing has changed. Even more worrying is that the Minister does not even acknowledge this is an issue. When I raised it with you, Minister, last April, you stated, at the moment, that sector, which is extremely sustainable, viable and important, gets 400 tonnes per year. A few years ago, it did not get any. I don't know any inshore fishers that would agree with that assessment. This sector is screaming out for a fairer allocation of quotas and targeted supports. The government could assign them 10 times their current mackerel quota and it still wouldn't be fair. I strongly support this motion's call for a greater quota allocation with diversification to other species. A more equitable and realistic distribution of our quotas is required, especially as some of them are impacted by Brexit. For too long, a small few big players have dominated the sector. Allocations must be taken from them and given to the majority of fishers that are practising a more sustainable type of fishing. Minister, inshore fishers are being hit by the same skyrocketing costs as other food producers, yet they're not getting the same attention. Fuel costs, insurance, bait prices are combining to make a tough situation even harder. Reflecting the structural barriers faced by this sector, many of the government's support schemes for the fishing industry in recent years have outright or de facto excluded inshore vessels. For example, the Brexit Inshore Fisheries Business Model Adjustment Scheme, designed to help inshore fishers adjust to the post-Brexit context, was based on a threshold of activity during the first 6 months of 2021. However, this disregarded the majority of under 8 metre vessels in West Cork and other areas that are involved in seasonal fisheries. With the challenges faced by many fishers, seasonal work is common. Lobster, velvet crab, scallop and brown crab are fished from July-August, outside the period which counted for the Brexit scheme. This exclusion is even more clear for inshore shrimp fishery, where by law it can only begin on the 1st of August. Minister, you have to appreciate the frustration in the industry when faced with barriers like this one. Schemes are announced with much fanfare, but then when fishers actually get to read the terms and conditions, they quickly realise they are barred from the funding. Minister, well-maintained marine infrastructure is vital for inshore fishers. They depend on small piers and slipways dotted around the coast and on offshore islands. However, many of these in West Cork and elsewhere are literally falling into disrepair and lack the most basic amenities. The Seafood Task Force recommended an investment of 80 million over 5 years for public marine infrastructure. While I of course welcome the 35 million from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve for this purpose, this is a once-off investment. There was and there is a glaring need for greater funding that's multi-annual. The Seafood Task Force had provided a clear standard, another 45 million. Regrettably, when I asked the parliamentary question about the budget in 2023, the Minister informed me that he was not providing any funding, instead directing me for the Minister for Housing. And Minister, as you know, it can take years to get a foreshore licence, so anything that you apply for in relation to funding that needs a foreshore licence basically won't get it because it has to be shovel ready. And I think we desperately need to look at the licensing system there as well, because other countries started from 6 miles out or 1 mile out rather than from the coastline. So it's counterintuitive in terms of trying to create more environmental practices. Every time I raise this issue, I'm referred from one department to another and back again. All the time, the need for investment is just not being provided. Earlier, I welcomed the news that the National Inshore Fishers Association have been recognised as a producer organisation. With this status, they will receive support for their operating costs and preparation of reports and plans. From the experience of other inshore fishers, there's a clear need for set-up cost to also be funded. There's a steep learning curve and a need for increased capacity on becoming a producer organisation. So, Minister, I'm wondering if you could look into the provision on specific once investment to new POs to help them be established. And I know perhaps it's changed since I last had a meeting with the islands PO that became POs months before this one. And they were saying they still hadn't received any kind of funding. And maybe I'm wrong now, maybe they have since, but it seems like there's a big delay for them being able to carry out their duties as a PO once they get it. Finally, Minister, there's an ongoing issue of trawling in inshore waters inside the 6 mile nautical zone. It's having a huge negative impact on inshore fishers' livelihood, not to mention the knock-on effects for marine activities and the environmental toll that takes. This matter remains with the courts. Minister, I've previously asked you to start the process again to establish another policy directive, which at this stage would have taken less time than the legal route. It's unbelievable that it was only overturned on a technicality, but it's still in place and these harmful practices are still being carried out. The outcome of the judicial review outlines the issues with the original process, rectify them in establishing a new directive and solve this matter once and for all. And Minister, I encourage you, I raised it with the Taoiseach last week, to look at existing bylaws, because there's pair trawling going on in West Cork last week, and it seems there's actually a bylaw, for example, in Bantry Bay that prevents that practice. This motion has provided much needed Dáil time to focus on the inshore sector. In any discussions of our food systems, this is one of the most neglected areas. Unfortunately, this reflects the importance assigned to the sector by the government. There are thousands of inshore fishers in coastal and island communities across Ireland. In West Cork, they're deeply valued as part of our local economy, providing jobs and fresh seafood for hotels, restaurants and takeaways. They're also part of our marine heritage. This sector is essential to the viability of offshore islands and coastal towns and villages and communities. The government needs to live up to its commitment to support the sector. Quotas need to be distributed proportionately. Targeted support suited to the inshore conditions must be provided, and we need sustained investment in public marine infrastructure. Inshore fishers are continuing to face mounting challenges. There is a glaring need for fairer policies and proper supports. The government must act. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Excuse me.
Next.
Chair, just as a point of order, I would like the Minister to apologise to the Cork County Council for the comments he made earlier on, stating that the Cork County Council never applied for funding for Union Hall Pier. They have, under your guidance, when you came down, when you said you were having nice meals or whatever down around Union Hall, you advised them to apply for a scoping funding and for feasibility funding, which they did. And your department refused them. And I think you need to correct the record. They will be writing to you about this matter, Minister, because there's a very serious allegation you made earlier on, and against my brother, but we're thick-skinned, we won't be worried about that. But I think he needs to correct the record to the Dáil that that is the case. And there's been other fundings applied for also down there, and you've refused, your department has refused.
Noted, and we'll ask the Minister to respond in his closing remarks. Deputy Boyd Barrett, 8 minutes.
Thanks for putting forward this important motion, which we're happy to support. Obviously, many of those who are speaking are from the west of Ireland and the south, where coastal communities and people working in fishing are very severely impacted by rising energy costs, the cost of living crisis, the impact of Brexit and so on. But it maybe would surprise people on the East Coast to know, because it's not talked about as much, that there is also very many people whose livelihoods depend directly or indirectly on inshore fishing. Talking to the fishermen who work out of Dunleary this morning, they have done a survey recently and are estimating that directly and indirectly between the border on the east coast and Kilmore Quay, there are about 800 people employed, directly or indirectly, from the fishing industry. And not to put too fine a point on it, they see themselves as really fighting for their survival. And they believe on a number of fronts the failure of the government to support them. They actually believe that their future is very, very much in jeopardy, and indeed that they might be completely wiped out as an industry. That's their view for a number of reasons. The motion here and the appeal of the inshore fishermen is obviously on the immediate issues of the cost of living crisis, the hike in energy prices, the collapse of the shrimp market. And on those fronts, the fishermen I were talking to were just detailing just how severe the various impacts are. So marine diesel, which used to be about 30 cents a litre, then went up to about 65 cents per litre and is now at, they say, 110 cents per litre. The cost of a lobster pot, which was about €45, has now gone up to about €70. The cost of shrimp pots are up by about 50%. And in overall costs, they say that the cost of just going out to work, to fish in a day has gone up by about 75 to 100%. That it used to cost the fishermen about €100 to go out, just to go out to work a day, and that cost has now gone up to between €150 and €200 just to go out to work. So they are being hammered, absolutely hammered, and they need this aid package that they're requesting, and there should be no procrastination by the government. They also say, again, that this tie-up scheme, for them, they're not interested in it, and they think actually this is part of an agenda essentially to wipe them out. They don't want to be tied up, they want to fish. They don't want to be paid to tie up, they want to fish, and they want assistance in order to sustain their livelihoods. But the other pressure they're under, which is obviously a little bit off the topic of the motion, but they asked me to speak about, is the impact of the so-called relevant projects, industrial wind schemes for the Kish and Codling banks, which are their key fishing grounds. And again, not to put too fine a point on it, they're very much in favour of developing offshore wind and renewable energy. They understand their importance, but they say the developer-led model, which is leading to these so-called legacy projects being dictated by the developers to put on the Kish and the Codling banks, will wipe them out, will destroy them completely. They're being roughshod over by these companies, is what they're telling me. It's severely impacting on them, and if these industrial wind farms are put on those particular locations, which should have been marine protected areas, which are very, very sensitive sandbanks, and which are key to their livelihoods, their industry, their jobs, their livelihoods will be wiped out. And that is contrary to all sorts of EU directives which require that there is not displacement as a result of the development of the much needed, and I want to stress the much needed industrial, the wind farms that we need, the renewable energy that we need, but it is not supposed to displace existing livelihoods, and that is exactly what's happening because the developers are dictating. It's absolutely outrageous what is going on. The government are facilitating the sort of madness, the developer-led madness that led to the Celtic Tiger crash And now we are seeing the same model of development being repeated in our marine area, and the fishermen are paying the price, but they also say the consequence of that will be disastrous for biodiversity, and indeed that those banks actually protect the east coast of Ireland. That's what they do. They protect the east coast, and that the damage to our coastal environment will be devastating if you have hundreds of wind turbines put on these sensitive banks that actually protect the east coast and provide the livelihood for our fishermen. So they say, yes, we need offshore wind, but not on areas that should be protected from a biodiversity point of view, from a marine biology point of view, and from the point of view of protecting the livelihoods of fishers and the people who work downstream in the industry and depend on those fishers. So I support the motion, and I would ask the Minister to respond positively to the request of inshore fishermen, but also to listen to what they are saying about the potential devastation that will be inflicted on fishers on the east coast, as well as all of the other areas that have been spoken about right across the country.
Thank you, Deputy. Next we have Deputy Verona Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. As someone who comes from a part of County Wexford, a mile from Duncannon, where fishing is a way of life for many, and in the past, you know, I am concerned very much for the community, and I want to thank and I want to support the Rural Independent Group on their motion today. And I just want to talk about some of the points that are highlighted in the motion, Chair. Firstly, it says all fishers, including the inshore fishermen, have been hit extremely hard by record-high fuel cost increases, while bait prices have also soared, which are mainly due to almost all bait now being imported, as the larger white fish vessels have taken advantage of the tie-up scheme. And we all know that the fuel costs has burdened so many different sectors in our society, but those in the fishing fleet are wholly reliant on going out to fish to make ends meet, and the alternative to this is to cease operating, which unfortunately, Chair, many are choosing to do. And those who rely on going to fish cannot avoid the fuel crisis by working from home, nor by switching to public transport, or just by buying a new electric vessel. And the choices which might be available to onshore workers to avoid the extra costs simply are not there for the fishing communities. This is why tax breaks or supports to a slightly larger degree than other sectors would be appropriate. The motion also highlights that small fishermen are facing annihilation, a problem which was exacerbated by the current government, which has decided the simplest solution to deal with the loss of the Irish fishing quota is to decommission the white fish fleet. This scenario sums up the government's approach to the fishing sector. Not just this government's approach, mind you, but previous governments also. And the political will just isn't there to stick up for the interests of Irish fishers when it comes to negotiations. The fallback solution appears to be, let's pay off the fishermen. Now, I'm pleased that the motion highlights the realities of many of the deals that the Irish government have agreed to at EU level. And there's no doubt that that our membership of the EU brings many benefits to sectors of the Irish economy. But it seems that at least the one exception to this is the fishing community. And the motion highlights some of the reality when it says Irish boat owners are forced to sit in the harbour and watch as their EU neighbours from France and Spain land fish from Irish waters in the Irish harbours, while benefiting from a fuel subsidy implemented by their governments on the back of a derogation given by the European Commission. Now, can you imagine just how soul-destroying this must be for Irish boat owners and fishers, struggling on the margins or towing the line between staying afloat or going out of business, to see this type of thing happening and being allowed to happen and continues to happen. With those things in mind, Chair, the motion calls for increased government supports for the inshore fishing sector, and that such a support scheme would be processed speedily and conveniently to increase quotas. I agree with the proposers of this motion in their calls for action And I hope that the Minister is listening, that the government will put a plan in place to support those in the inshore fishing. But I want to read an email I received in January, and Minister, it's just on foot of some of the commentary that you had in your speech. And I think, you know, I stood on the pier in Kilmore Quay with you, and your visit was very much appreciated. But I think, if you recall, the anger was palpable from a community in Kilmore who the entire community depends on fishing. They have a processing plant. All of our restaurants and hotels in Kilmore have their reputation because of fresh fish caught by their fishermen, their own local fishermen. And this is something I received on the 9th of January from one fisherman in Kilmore. And it says, the decommissioning scheme has been in the news lately, and we would like to give our views. A figure is calculated for compensation based on tonnage of the boat, the amount of fish caught and the age of the boat. This presumably is to compensate fishermen for the loss of his income or their income and way of life forever. This should not be confused with the temporary tie-up scheme, which has run for the last 2 years as compensation for our reduced quotas due to Brexit. The decommissioning and temporary tie-up are separate schemes, and the tie-up money should not be deducted from the decommissioning money. The decommissioning scheme is a disaster for coastal communities. It is a cop-out by the government, who have failed miserably to get a fair share for our fishers, even in our own waters. Since 1983, we have 2.9% of that quota for sole in area F and G. And in brackets, he says, the south coast of Ireland to Land's End is which that area covers. Belgium has 63%. A disparity there, Minister, of over 60% to the advantage of Belgium. Ireland has 7% of the monkfish, while France has 57%, and Belgium again are up on Ireland at 8%. If we had a fair share of the quotas, there would be no need for a decommissioning scheme, and the state would save some €60 million. If there is a big take-up, the industry will get very small and will not be able to sustain many of the backup industries, such as processing, engineering, transport. And I think, Minister, we can bring tourism, and serious tourism, particularly in coastal areas. The value of the restaurants having fresh fish every day is particularly what enhances people and brings them into the community. But a much better scheme, he continues, would be to continue the temporary tie-up for 1 month every year. And I think we've got, in line of what we've been discussing, again, it's your department, albeit a different junior minister, Cuilta and decommissioning. We're selling off the family silver. At least that's what it looks like, Minister, in rural Ireland. And I know you're from a coastal community. But why would we be selling, why would Cuilta be selling our lands? And something that was brought to my attention this morning, and I think it's very relevant, because this is about rural Ireland, and it's also about rural communities. But you have the power as Minister to change the forest premium, because it hasn't been sanctioned by the EU. There would be 100 million in forest premiums leaving the country annually. And, Minister, I'm told that you can reduce this to the investors that Cuilta seem to have a done deal with. But what is being suggested, and I very much back the suggestion, is that you would reduce the premium to the investors and increase it to the farmers, which would incentivise farm forestry. And at the very least, we would retain ownership of our lands. And I think decommissioning is the same thing. We are selling the family silver. Rural Ireland, I think, you know, when Leo Varadkar, our Taoiseach, appointed a third minister in a Dublin central constituency, it was a rejection of rural Ireland and the calls that we put on the floor like this. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy. To remind deputies, this motion is on inshore fisheries, not on forestry. So we proceed to Deputy Catherine Connolly.
And I welcome the opportunity to speak on this important matter. I want to thank Deputy Collins and his colleagues for bringing this, and I fully support it. And they have highlighted the crisis that the industry is in. And the urgent need, and they've identified a figure which in the scheme of money given out by the government, often unaccounted for and often without transparency and accountability coming back. This is very, very different. And your comments that it's the first time that a group has brought a private members' bill is not helpful, because small groups can only bring private members' bills on an irregular, let's say on a very intermittent basis. And if I use myself as an example, I've brought bills or motions on seaweed, on a policy for the islands. Nothing has happened, and they're all interlinked, of course. We've had one on wool, interlinked again with local industry, the viability of coastal communities, seaweed, wool, fishing, and a policy for the islands. None of them have materialised, not one of them, and we're waiting. And so I welcome the positives, First Minister, before I go on to analyse where I see the difficulties with the government. I welcome the announcement that there's a National Inshore Fishermen's Association recognised as a producer organisation. Of course, the value of that will depend on its total independence from the department and its total independence in relation to resourcing. Now, I hope that producer organisation doesn't have the distinction of standing over the death of fishing in our coastal areas. I hope that's not the outcome. The motion is particularly well laid out. It sets out in detail, and I thank Deputy Collins for that. And what I want to focus in on is in relation to the inshore fishing, the very good policy by the government back in 2018 to ban trawlers over 18 metres from the inshore. A wonderful policy. Now, it has already been referred to already by Deputy Cairns, but the update hasn't been given at all. So just very quickly, you bring in a very good policy. You give a transition period for the bigger trawlers in relation to sprat. You give them a 2 or 3 year window to get out of the inshore waters. And unfortunately, a case is taken to the High Court by a number of big boat owners. And they win on a technicality. The technicality simply being that the communication process wasn't as it should be. Fast forward to this year to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal has held completely with the government. And it's worth, this is the Court of Appeal judgment. I've taken the trouble to read it in detail, and on the 19th of July 22, they held with the government's policy utterly and completely. Now, can you tell me today what has happened since the 18th of July? The only little obstacle at the bottom of that judgment was the court asked for submissions in relation to a Northern Ireland aspect and Northern Ireland vehicles. Otherwise, it has been a complete victory for the government. Their policy has been upheld. More particularly, the Court of Appeal said the policy directive to exclude the big trawlers from taking sprat on a basis that is simply not viable was a measure of the conservation for fish stocks within the relevant regulation. The failure to notify, and that's the consultation process, had no effect on the validity. Win-win for the government. The policy directive, the policy was not discriminatory. It was intra-virus. In other words, you had the power to do what you did. It wasn't irrational, it was rational. It was legally adequate, and a reasonable leader construing the consultation paper would not have concluded that the applicants, the people who took the case, enjoyed any right to a second consultation. So no need for a second consultation. Your policy has been upheld, and simply 7 months later, we've no clarification from you on a matter that's so important. The unsustainable removal of sprat from our inshore waters that's making it impossible for smaller fishermen to continue. And if we look at the policy and what was behind it, there was a six-fold justification for it, which I won't read out, only some of it, to provide wider ecosystem benefits, including for nursing areas and juvenile stocks. And it goes on to outline all of them. Excluding vessels over 18 metres from trawling inside the 6 nautical mile zone would present a significant economic opportunity to smaller inshore vessels. The increase in availability of sprat and possibly of herring to smaller vessels would represent a significant diversification opportunity for these smaller vessels. There were potential knock-on benefits for other economic sectors if the restrictions were introduced, which is what the government were doing back in December 18. And finally, the restrictions ultimately reflected the policy directive would go to some way to addressing the issue of gear conflict, in that the loss of the static fishing gear used by smaller vessels as a consequence of net trawling by larger boats. The background and the evidence given, which wasn't challenged by the government, was that the number of vessels in the 12 to 18 metre fleet in Ireland is very low and continues to decline, reflecting the very difficult environment in which these small boats operate, which is the whole substance of this motion before us today. There is a compelling case for excluding trawling activity by large vessels in coastal waters inside the 6 nautical miles. There are sufficient opportunities for these vessels outside of the 6 nautical miles, and on it goes, and it talks about the importance of small fishermen earning a living that's sustainable in small vessels in a sustainable way. That's what this motion is about. And what really worries me is your sort of quick retort, and I can see why you might retort to some of the language used, but that's neither here nor there. The duty is on you to come forward to tell us what you're doing in terms of policy and an action plan so that we have sustainable coastal communities based on seaweed, which is the most fantastic product that we're ignoring until we give it to the big boys, or to be fair, to the big girls. Wool. An absolute wonderful, what did we do? Somebody should set up a wool council. We set up a report, fantastic recommendations, highlights the diversity of how wool can be used, and then we ignore it. And what do we do with small vessels? We make it absolutely impossible for them. And when we bring in a policy directive, we let it trundle on for 4 years through the courts without making a damning case or a strong case to the court to say, please, hear this quickly. And when they did hear it in July, they gave you a win. And you're making the win a loss because you're still allowing the big trawlers into the 6 mile area to fish unsustainably for sprat that's going to feed other unsustainable fish farming activities. So, Minister, I have no hesitation in supporting this motion today. I want to thank the rural group again for bringing it, and the comments in relation to we should bring these motions in our time is simply not helpful. The duty is on ye to tell us what the policy is.
Thank you, Deputy. And to finalise then, we have both Minister Chris O'Sullivan, Deputy Chris O'Sullivan, and Minister of State Oisin Smith. Deputy O'Sullivan, you're down here.
How much have I got?
4 minutes.
4
minutes.
Perfect,
and 6
okay.
minutes for Deputy or Minister Smith.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. First of all, I welcome the Rural Independent motion, but in doing so, I do note some of the accusations being levelled at the Minister in terms of accusations that you've done nothing for the inshore sector, accusations of ignoring the sector, accusations of neglect, and this constant mudslinging that we're seeing from the opposition representative towards you. And I think it's absolutely ridiculous because, as I can outline the investment that you have given to peers
into the smaller fishermen
from
that are lying in ruin.
Sorry, Cathaoirleach, please, if you wouldn't mind. You can sling mud at me all you want, Deputy Collins. You can sling mud at me all you want. Okay, you can sling mud at me all. I'm well used to it. Accusations of ignoring the sector, but you've outlined some of the investment that you've made for piers and harbours, right from Kinsale to Castletownbere. You've invested in the fishermen's pontoon in Kinsale. You've invested in the pontoon in Cormac's the dredging works at Cormac's, a pontoon that is used by the inshore sector. You've invested in Lara de Talavalley Pier, which is used by the inshore sector. You've invested in Connemara. You've invested in Kinsale, as I've already said. Yes, there was an application in from Cork County Council for works at Union Hall. There was application in for a barrier that would have cut off access for pier users down in Union Hall. And I'm glad that that application was rejected because it would have cut off access to what we call the leisure pier in Union Hall. So I'm happy that that was rejected by you, Minister. You introduced a Brexit scheme for the inshore sector, something that isn't acknowledged. And when that original scheme was only for a 6-month period, the inshore sector came to you and they asked for an extension of the scheme to include the entire year. And you did that, and you accepted it, but you won't get any acknowledgement from the opposition. And when I talk about those works that you did on the piers and harbours across West Cork, you'll get mud slung at you from them, but they will be the first people to stand down on those piers and put up social media posts welcoming the funding that they secured for each and every one of those piers, with absolutely no acknowledgement towards you. But you know what, Minister? People will see through that, and the inshore sector will see through that as well. You open up the spur dog fishery, and what I would say in relation to the spur dog fishery, I'd welcome... Can I hear that, please? I'd welcome if, with the opening up of the spur dog fishery, that we could see the processors, the small processors across Ireland, that they would, I suppose, open up an industry there in relation to the spur dog industry and processing same. You met with NIFA at my request before Christmas in response to the collapse in the shrimp market. You did that at the drop of a hat, and I welcome that. And they had two asks. One, that they would secure PO status. And we found out this week that that has been secured. And the second ask was in relation to the shrimp market and the collapse of the shrimp market. And we asked that you would provide support package for that. And that is the main crux of what I want to speak about here today. We need a package to support that inshore sector who have been severely, negatively impacted by the fact that the shrimp market has collapsed, mainly in Spain, where a lot of our shrimp goes. The demand and the market for that species has collapsed. And they have produced quite a graph, and I'm not sure if you can see it from here, but very simply, it shows the price that they were getting for shrimp in 2021, which is this line, and then this is the line in 2022. You can see there's a severe and dramatic collapse in the market for shrimp. And that is my main ask for you here today, Minister. You've responded before when we've come to you looking for extensions of schemes. You've responded when we look for investment in our piers and harbours. And I'm confident that you will respond when we're looking for a package here as well. And, sorry, how long do I have to leave for the... Another 13 seconds. OK. Look, I'll finish on this. Another graph that I could show you is in relation to fuel and fuel costs, and how fuel costs have increased dramatically from 2018, 19, 20, 21 up to 22. That is the second ask that I have here with you today in relation to the inshore sector and across the entire fishing fleet, inshore and offshore, is that we look for fuel subsidy for that sector.
Thank you. Minister Oisin-Smith, 6 for 5 minutes, 48 seconds.
And Deputy, the Minister for Agriculture, Food and the Marine has recognised the value and importance of the inshore fishing sector, and he has pledged his ongoing commitment to supporting it during his frequent engagement with sector representatives. He's ensured support for the National Inshore Fisheries Forum in the developing and implementing of their own industry-led strategy to raise the profile of the inshore sector, to facilitate their engagement in policy initiatives and to enhance their understanding of management and planning for inshore fisheries. Further, he has facilitated constructive discussions around industry priorities and exploring new opportunities for diversification. The inshore sector has a role in making recommendations on the allocation of Ireland's fishing quotas and emerging policies and initiatives through representation on a number of fisheries consultative structures, including the Quota Management Advisory Committee. State bodies also provide a range of services to the inshore fleet, including advisory services and stock conservation supports. During the lifetime of this government, 2 producer organisations have been guided to achieving official recognition, which will assist in the development of the sector and market opportunities through production and marketing plans, and also provide additional representation for inshore fishers to give them a stronger voice. Aside from the ongoing work on protecting and expanding the fishing opportunities for the inshore sector, the Minister has also consistently provided developmental and financial supports. Under the EMFF Seafood Development Programme, there has been significant investment in areas such as capital investment on vessels, grants to fishers for them to engage in conservation initiatives, and public interest projects aimed at ensuring sustainable fishing opportunities now and in the future. The recommendations of the Seafood Task Force, which were shaped by the valuable contributions of representatives from the inshore sector, are being implemented, and the Minister has included those directed at inshore fishers among the prioritised schemes. This includes the introduction of the Inshore Fisheries Business Model Adjustment Scheme, for which the Minister has secured €3.7 million in funding and resulted in direct payments to inshore fishers of between €2,700 and €4,000. In addition, the Minister's introduction of a €1 million inshore marketing scheme will create new and better avenues for the sale of inshore species and achieve higher prices for our fishers. And meanwhile, the rollout of the full suite of measures based on task force recommendations will provide new and diverse opportunities for those working in the inshore sector. These supports will be closely followed by the implementation of the EMFAF Seafood Development Programme, which has included a specific and prominent focus on small-scale coastal fisheries. As a member state of the European Union, there are necessary processes that we must engage with, and there are regulations that we must adhere to in order to develop specific schemes and supports so that we don't interfere with the integrity of the single market. While the Minister has already committed to providing funding for the inshore sector through his department's FAF Seafood Development Programme, the precise nature of these supports will need to be formulated in accordance with these rules through the processes which have been established and in accordance with relevant regulations for the management of FAF funding. It would not serve the inshore fishers to propose funding without regard for these processes and the regulations that underpin them. The best way to deliver focused and necessary funding to the sector is to work through the programme, which has been adopted by the European Commission, and that's exactly what the Minister has been doing. The Minister will continue to engage, and the Minister will work with representatives of the inshore sector directly to identify precise needs to develop supports which are both appropriate to the sector and in compliance with the EU regulations and guidelines, and to allocate funding on a prioritised basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister. That brings us to the closing speech of Deputy Healy-Rae. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank very much the Inshore Fishermen's Association, Michael Desmond and the others, and the fishermen in County Kerry, the inshore fishermen who I've been consulting with about this matter over the last number of months. First of all, I'd like to thank our own group under Deputy Matthew McGrath. I was glad to propose this as our motion for today because of the importance that the fact is there right now, Minister, that hundreds of inshore fishermen have no income today. I'm talking about today. They don't have an income. I'm very, very interested in the speech you made earlier on because you said that you were sort of throwing it over at us, that you were blaming us here in opposition that we weren't raising the inshore fishermen enough. Well, we're raising it today. We'll give you an opportunity to do what we're looking for. And our motion aims to force the government to finally act by allocating at least 12 million in funds to the inshore shrimp and velvet crab fishermen from the available 285 European Maritime Fishermen's and Aquacultural Fund. We're asking you to give them money today. Now I hear everybody and backbenchers there support you and saying you're great. Well, are you going to give them money? Will you announce today that you'll give them money? That's what we need. Now, the other thing I'm going to say, because I really found your speech very puzzling, because you spoke about piers and harbours that you've given money to piers. I would warmly welcome any money that you would give to a pier. Back over the years, going back into the 90s and the 2000s, I brought many deputations up here to the late Jackie Healy-Rae, fishermen from places down around Kilmaclogue and Sneem and Blackwater, Cremon. I brought them from everywhere up to him. And he met ministers and they did give money for piers. But remember, a pier is no good if the fishermen can't fish from there if they don't have a thing called a quota. Now, that brings us on to quotas. What did you do about the quotas? You were funding piers and you were talking about what you did. You said you gave 20 million in Donegal. I'm asking you about the 43 million of the annual quota loss that we've lost during the Brexit negotiations. What have you been doing to renegotiate that? What are you doing when it comes to fighting for more for our fishermen? Because again, a pier is no good if Irish fishermen can't fish off it. And yes, there are piers above in Donegal, beautiful piers, and the Spanish are parked above there. And they have the quota to come in and out of there. What are our own lads doing? They're idle and they have no income. And I'd ask you to address that, Minister. And I'd ask you to sort of knock out the confusion that we are bringing forward this motion today. You're welcoming it. Well, will you welcome it by saying that you agree with it? And that not only will you agree with it, you'll put your money where your mouth is. You're saying that it's not raised here enough. Well, it's raised here to you now today. And I'm specifically speaking now, and I'm going to tell you who I'm speaking on behalf of, because I thank them very much for meeting with me over the last number of weeks. And I'll start below in Michael Collins's heartland down into Castletown Bear, and coming up along into Larrock, and down into Kilmaclogue, and over into Two Assist, up on the Kemare River, down into Castle Cove, Caherdaniel, Blackwater, Sneem. All of these people, down into Carasiveen and around the Ringding, back up into Killarglen, Cremon, down into Dingle, all of these fishermen have no money at the moment. The inshore fishermen, they don't have an income. And I'm standing up here today on behalf of them. I've met with them. I've consulted with them. I've spoken to them this morning. I spoke to them last night. And what they asked me to do was to ask you in an earnest but hard but firm way, will you give them money? Because they need it. They don't have any income. They can't get any type of social welfare. They're not part of any scheme that is there for the bigger fishermen. And I don't begrudge the bigger fishermen anything. And it was stated, I'm sorry, I can't remember, maybe it was one of the Sinn Féin people that said it earlier on, that there should be no such thing as trying to cause a divide between the bigger fishermen and the smaller fishermen. We're not doing that. But what we're doing is we're standing up today specifically for the inshore small fishermen who might have a part-time or indeed a full-time income from it, but at the moment they have nothing from it. And I'm asking you to please address that. And I'm actually on my knees today asking you to do that. The whole thrust of this motion is that we're looking for money. I want to ask you, with regard to the communities themselves, it has a massive knock-on effect when fisher people don't have an income. It has a massive knock-on effect to that local rural community. All we want is a thing called fair play. There has been a sellout over the years. The pair trawling, for instance, that goes on in places like the Kenmare River, which other people call the Kenmare Bay, it hoovers up everything that's there. It's wrong. It's morally wrong to do that. And it's debarring these other people of having stocks to fish on. And I'd ask you to please do, and I know that in the past I've raised it here going back many years, and yes, it resulted in a court case which didn't go right at the time, but that needed to be sorted out to ensure that that practice would be stopped and stopped forever. I'd specifically here today ask the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael backbenchers, what are they going to do? Or are they going to sell out the fishermen, the fisher people, the same as they've sold out the farmers? I'll say it again here on the record of the Dáil, and I get no pride in saying it, that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have lost rural Ireland. Don't mind the Greens because they never had it to lose it. But Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have lost the grap, the hold, the sincerity, the good people. And I'm not going to criticise those people in those communities that were supporting Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, because they were sound people, they were workers, they were good people, but they're gone from me. And they're gone forever. And now I don't know where they're going to go, but I do know one thing. They're not going to stand with Fianna Fáil. They're not going to stand with Fine Gael, because you didn't stand with them. You sold them out, you left them down, and we are here today scraping and begging to see, will you give them 12 million euros? You made a great speech earlier on, and you never said you were going to give them the money. It's absolutely crazy. What I want to say is I want a bit of clarification about Union Hall, because it was stated that an application was made and it was made for a barrier. That's factually incorrect. It was a feasibility study that the money was sought for, and you didn't give it.
We can clarify that.
And I would specifically give up time to answer that specific case, because it won't take you long, and I'll stop in time to leave the minister come in and answer that charge. Did your department receive an application? And if you did, why didn't you give them the 300,000 euros? No, just give me one more minute. I promise I'll give you the time.
Give me the time now.
Yeah, but no, I'm going to give you the time. I promise I'll stop in time. Now, what I do want to say about the piers, you were boasting about the money that you gave for the piers in Donegal. I'd ask you, we've had applications from County Kerry, and we have places, we have the Oysterbed Pier, we have other piers in County Kerry, that a very small amount of money would help our fishermen to keep going there. And we're asking you for that, and Kerry County Council have excellently put forward proposal after proposal, and we haven't received the funding. And I'd ask you to support them. But the main thrust of the argument today is to not let us down and not let us be in such a way that we are going to have to go back to these people and say that, well, we brought forward the motion, we did our best, we were supported very strongly by Sinn Féin and by other independents, and we thank them all for that. Very, very much we thank them for their support. But then your own backbenchers stand up, praise you, clap you on the back, and at the same time he'll give us nothing. Now, I'm going to sit down, and I'd ask you to please allow my time then to be transferred to the Minister to see will he give us a couple of straight answers. And please don't sit down without saying yes or no to giving us the money for the inshore fishing sector. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Concordia, and thank you, Deputy Healy-Rae, for the opportunity to come in and clarify that. And I want to be very clear to Deputy Collins. I wasn't accusing Cork County Council of being asleep at the wheel. I was accusing you of being asleep at the wheel, Deputy Collins, because you were up here railing and ranting about an application that didn't get funding, which wasn't submitted, because there is no proposal yet from Cork County Council ready in relation to development for Union Hall. No proposal ready which meets the criteria in relation to a development grant for Union Hall, because Cork County Council still need to do the preparatory work and the scoping work, which isn't covered by the department, isn't covered by the bar scheme, in order to get to that stage. So, and what I was saying is you're asleep at the wheel because your own brother had been chairman of Cork County Council, and if the two of you have been tic-tacking and more focused on actually doing the work rather than giving out, you might have been aware of that before you got up on the floor of the Dáil here today to give out again as well. Thank you.
To your department for a feasibility on Union Hall. And your department has refused to give that money to the people of West Cork and to Union Hall. You yourself went down there after the Brexit disaster that you played a massive part in, and you went down to Union Hall and you done nothing for them. You told them to apply for this funding, and they did. And you refused to give it to them afterwards. Shame on you, shame on Fianna Fáil. That's what you've done.
Count caller.
Time now.
Count caller.
No,
Mike.
sorry. I know.
The Minister never answered.
Yeah,
was
right.
he going to give the money or not?
Okay.
Yes or no?
Well, we haven't.
Well, he had the time.
Yeah.
Are we just want yes or no, Minister?
Agreed to.
Yes or no?
Motion agreed to.
Silence.
The motion is agreed. The motion is agreed. Right, motion is agreed. You're not accepting that the motion is agreed? What's your own motion? But no, sit down, sit down, sit down.
He wouldn't. This is the correct they have.
Sure,
They're not going to give the money. They agreed the motion. No, but you. We're not asleep.
Resume your seat.
We're not asleep at all, Concola.
Resume your seat. Now, I mean, hold on. Let's just be clear. You're not saying you're refusing to accept the fact that your own motion has been accepted. No,
because he's playing a three-card trick. We are, because he's playing a three-card trick.
All right.
And we put down a motion in good faith. We expect an answer, and we expect the government to oppose it.
Resume your seat, please. Okay. Well, I'm bewildered. Na teachtaí, right, let's see. Na teachtaí atá thaobh na tariscine aber dhís tá. Oh, nobody's in favour. Tá. Did I hear the government say tá? No? Tá. Nobody says that. Na teachtaí atá in na Gaine aber dhís. Neil? I'll have to get advice.
You'll have
It is our motion, and we are obviously supporting our motion, and we are putting it before the. Well, I'm sorry, because I was trying to intervene and he wouldn't let me intervene because I asked the Minister to give a straight answer whether he was going to give the money or not, and he wouldn't say yes or no. So we'll take that as a no. So we are supporting our motion.
Again, na teachtaí atá thaobh na tariscine aber dhís tá. In na Gaine aber dhís Neil. Thank you. Straight to the questions carried. Before going to leaders' questions, before going to leaders' questions,